2014 Ram 1500 5.7 liter. Today we're going to work on changing out the rack and pinion. I looked all over YouTube and the web, and the most current I can find was a 2002 or 2003. This has electronic power steering also. So we're just in the process of taking the wheels off, jacking it up, and we'll continue from there. Okay, tires off. Safety, of course. We've got a floor jack and 2 jack stands. Now we're going to have to disconnect that tie rod right here on the driver's side, tie rod on the passenger side. You can see the rack and pinion parts right there. You can see the 2 bolts, large bolts right there, holding on the rack and pinion. And we're going to take a look to see where the steering gear is and the harness plug for the electrical power steering. The truck now, camera facing forward. You can see the harness plug right here for the electrical power steering, and then gotta follow. See up here, right up through there, there's a bolt holding on the steering gear. It looks like it's going to be a pain in the neck to get to, but what are you going to do? Before we disconnect anything, everywhere I've read said make sure the wheels are straight so the steering wheel doesn't move. As you can see, I strapped down the steering wheel to the brake pedal also to keep it from moving. Alright, I just sprayed the lower tie rods and the steering gear linkage bolt with PB Blaster. Loosened it up just in case. The nuts on the bottom of the tie rods are 13/16. So I'm going to loosen both of those up for now first. While loosening up the bolt on this tie rod, I noticed that the stem, the bottom of the bolt, was turning. So I had to hold that with a vice grip and get a 13/16 open end and loosen it up that way, just in case you come across that issue. Now we decided to go with an OEM original part on this. I didn't want to take a chance with steering on my son's truck. So, for those of you that want it, this is the OEM part number right there. And the nice thing about the OEM piece is, comes with the tie rods, which will save you on an OEM part close to $200. Now these retail for, I think, $1,875, but if you know somebody, wholesale price is $1,500. They make you pay $250 for the core, and we'll get that refunded as soon as we return the original core. Another item on the OEM is, you can see it comes with new bushings. Now a lot of the aftermarket ones we looked at did not have bushings, so that's another expense you got to consider. Right now what I'm doing is looking at where the electrical harness mounts to. So make sure you have that straight. Looks like a cap. Yep. Alright, gives you an idea how that plugs in. So nice to have this unit to line up, and that's the steering gear right there. Now we're going to tackle the main bolts. Just want to get them loosened up. They are 15/16. 15/16. So I'm going to get out, sorry about that, I'm going to get out the breaker bar and try to loosen those up. Now these bolts nuts are pretty tight, so I've got my trusty pipe on the end of the breaker bar. I'll give that a shot. Well, that did the trick. So loosen them both up, a couple of threads, just back them out, get them started. A suggestion, silly suggestion I guess, open the hood, you get a lot more light where you're working, and make sure I didn't do it yet, unplug your underhood light. So for your battery, for the tie rods, I've got a 5-pound sledge and 2 tie rod tools or forks to break the tie rod. I'm not sure yet if I'm going to use these, or I'm just going to put a little jack underneath the tie rods, jack them up a little bit, and smack the lower control arm and see if they pop out that way. We'll try it that way first. Well, I gave it a couple of mild shots, 2 or 3 shots right here, and separated quick, which was great. Try the same thing now on the opposite side. Thing on this side came off pretty easy. It was just a couple of shots right here. Popped right up, gave it a shot from underneath. That was it. Lucked out. Now this truck has, as information, 96,000 miles on it, just as info. One more thing to keep in mind. We are going to have to take the measurement from here to here, and when we install the new outer tie rod ends on the new rack and pinion, it's got to be the exact same measurement. So make sure you don't loosen up any of these bolts. When I get this entire unit out, I'm going to measure it from here to right there. They say you can count the threads also, but I just want to get an overall measurement and make sure it's right. Actually, I'm probably going to go from right there to the end of the tie rod where it mounts. So that total measurement is what we're going to need, and you have to do it separate on both sides because it's probably going to be different. In fact, I don't think it's going to be exactly the same. All right, this was probably the hardest part so far. As you can see, it's finally disconnected. What we had to do is use a half inch, Paulie? Yeah. Half-inch socket, and I held it from down here, and he was able to turn it from up there, and then I got a screwdriver down here and hit it a few times, and it disconnected the steering gear from the steering wheel from the rack and pinion. So a little bit of a pain in the neck, but it worked. All right, go ahead if you can. I'm working on disconnecting the harness.
I think you need to pry it back. Yeah, these are two. Right,
so this piece here pulls backwards this way as far as you can. Then we had to get a screwdriver in here to pry the plug out slightly. I mean a little at a time, a little on the top, a little on the bottom, and then it pulls out. The connector on the other side, this red connector, same thing. You had to pull it down this way and then pry it out again with the screwdriver. So both harness plugs disconnected now. We're disconnecting the tie rods completely. 13/16. We're going to take this one out and then the other one out, and then just pop those tie rods up. Right, same issue on this side. The as we use the socket, the bottom stem of the tie rod was turning, so we just put a ratchet on there on the bottom, and we're loosening it up with an open end. Taking a measurement now, I put the ball joint back in, so we're at, from right there at the top, we butted it up against the clip, and we are at 12 3/4. That's a distance we're going to make sure that the new one's at, 12 3/4. Measuring the other side, and that is at just, this side is at just about the same, maybe 11/16. All right, we're loosening up the 2 main bolts. Once again, 15/16. We got them so you can take them off now with a socket. Just got to be careful because the whole unit can fall down now. Here's what you're going to do. We're putting these tie rods, we're going to shove the tie rods back in, thread the bottom of the tie rod a couple of threads up with a nut, just to keep the whole unit from falling down when we take these big bolts out. Just as a precautionary measure, I wire tied the harness up. I was concerned that when the rack and pinion came down, I don't want it ripping out the harness. Just a safety precaution. Connecting the second one. Bolt. Alright, so obviously you can see it's disconnected and fell down a bit. We still got the tie rods connected. Now we have to figure out, I believe it goes out the passenger side. So that's what we're going to try to do now. Slide it out because it won't go down because of the tie rods. So we got to try to slide it out that way. Okay, so we got the other one. We got it out, and here's what we did. We worked it out towards the driver's side, and once, I'm sorry, the passenger side, and once we got this side, the driver's side tie rod, past the spring, then we just pulled this side down to the ground and slid the unit back out towards the driver's side. So easy enough. And what also happened, we noticed, is you'll see this one's still intact and it's got a crack in it, the bushing. This one was broken off, and there's the pieces for that. So that's why it's a good thing we got new bushings on the new unit. Measuring out of curiosity where the nut is on the new one. It starts, well,
almost 8.
All right. So it's, no, that's 12/16. Get that good. 13/16, 14/16, which is 7/8. Right? 7 7/8 is the end. Let's just see this one. Out of curiosity. That looks, that's at 8.
Yeah, a little bit more than 8.
So that's why we took the overall dimensions. All right, what we're going to do is, these threads are kind of shabby, corroded, you can see. So I'm going to put them on the grinding wheel, and then I'm going to put some anti-seize on them, clean them up a bit so they thread nicer. I'm going to take a little lithium grease and just put it on the end here, hopefully to help it slide into the steering wheel joint a little better. I'm going to end up putting some anti-seize on both ends here and here. Cleaned up the ends, and I'm going to do the same thing here. Put some anti-seize on these. Got all the most of the surface rust, and there was dirt in the threads. Cleaned all that out too with the brush wheel. Just stuck some Permatex, or whatever brand you have, anti-seize on the big bolts. And I still have to do this one, and then we're going to shove these in and line up the rack and pinion and get these threads started to hold it up in place. Now we decided that we're not putting the tie rods on yet because thought process is they get in the way of when you're trying to line the rack and pinion or get the rack and pinion back up where it goes. After it's up there, then we'll measure and thread on the tie rod ends. All right, so we slid the new rack and pinion up through the passenger side up there as far as we could, and then we were able to get this end up. We attached the two big bolts, hand tightened them, and then gave them a couple of turns with the ratchet just to hold them in. And now we're going to go over everything to make sure everything's lined up properly. We're putting the harness on now while it's still a little loose because this side's a pain in the neck to get to. So we have a little extra space now with it loose, the rack and pinion. Got it in clipped in? It looked like it pushed in.
Yeah.
You could actually see it from over here, Paulie.
Yeah, no, it's in.
Okay. Popping the other side in. Locking a clip.
Okay.
Sounded good. Clips locked? Yeah. We're tightening up the rack now. We're not going to torque them yet, but we're going to snug it up because what I noticed is when you're putting on that steering gear, the whole rack and pinion was moving when it was loose. So we're going to snug it up and put on the steering gear, and then we'll do the tie rods. We're going to, this was the steering bolt. They recommend on a couple of videos I saw that you change this, but we're just going to clean it up and same thing, anti-seize on it. And we lined up the steering gear, I don't know if you could see it, and tightening up now with the ratchet. Put a little cleaned up the threads, put some WD-40 on the threads, and it slid right on the steering gear. Made sure it was lined up perfect, and now we're just tightening up the bolt. It's easy to get to from up above. You can reach it from below, but either way. Okay. We're up to the tie rods. Now I'm going to put some anti-seize on the threads, and then we're going to thread it on measure it up, and tighten it down. We did notice that although we got new tie rod ends, the bolts are not on here, so we do have to use our old bolts. Our old nuts. We're going to clean those up a bit. Okay, slid on the tie rods, measured them up. Same exact thing. We got, this side was 12 3/4. It's hard to see. I have to hold it and see at the same time. So we're right there, 12 3/4. And then we just snugged up this nut. First we're going to tighten down the bottom of the tie rod nut. What was the torque on that?
55.
55. And then we'll tighten this one up right here. Now we're going to go measure off the other side. Alright, both sides we tightened up the nut on the bottom, and eventually it turned the whole stem again. So we had to use an open end, and we used rather than using a vice grip here, I didn't want to mar this up on the new one, so we put a 10mm down here, held it on, and used an open end to tighten that up, and we used an inch on this one to tighten that up. All right, tightening up the two large bolts holding on the rack and pinion, and my trusty pipe for leverage here. All right, got everything together, started it up. Everything seems to work all right. First time though, when we did, the check power steering message came on, or electric power steering, which we expected. We read, in some cases, you're going to have to get the new electric power steering unit scanned into the computer system to make it work right. So we're going to, I'm going to call my mechanic now, and we're going to bring it down there to take care of that, and also to check on the alignment. Turn the steering wheel. Press brake. Parking light on. No. That's not it.